Team, I want to talk about writing the body of your workout. So we've had a little look at the warm-up and now I want to dive into the body. Now we're going to do so many videos on this stuff, it's not funny. So if you don't understand some of the stuff that we've talked about, or although going over it many, many times, you're still struggling with it, that's totally fine. We're going to go over this stuff a lot because this is the stuff that everyone seems to get wrong, and also stuff that people care the most about, right? Like I will be posting hundreds and hundreds of hours of just straight up programs so you guys can use them as much as you want. And then these kind of videos will help us deep dive into the why of what the stuff I'm doing, so you can actually start writing your own stuff instead of just templating off other people's, which is the end goal. Like beginners will need to template off stuff. That's totally fine. As you get more and more advanced, I want you to start building your own stuff, which is, at the end of the day, my goal is to get all the personal trainers and coaches who are willing to improve their programming, create a better product, make more money, and improve personal training as a whole that currently doesn't have a very good reputation. So the good thing about the body of the workout, the main meat and potatoes, is that there's only really a couple of concepts in the general setting. The more specific you get, so the more specific to sports you get, the more these rules will shift. But if you're a specific sports coach, then you already know the rules of that sport anyway. But I just want to dive a little bit into some of the things that I would probably be thinking about when writing my program. So a good rule of thumb is, as your programming goes, I'm always going from the lowest heart rate to the highest heart rate activity. Now, what does that mean? It means that as I start my workout, I'm starting with low intensity training. As I go to the middle of my workout, I go to my middle intensity training, and I always end my workouts on high intensity training, traditionally. Again, this is very general, very global. My warm-up is usually either low intensity or it's at rest. So we're not even really doing a whole lot to get that heart rate elevated. As the heart rate increases, so too does body temperature, and so too does warmth and movement of body, which is kind of the idea of why we go lowest to highest. We don't just start off with sprints, because since the body's not warm and since the heart rate is going from nothing to a spike, you have a higher risk of injuring the client, but also you might not be able to get the same metrics that you're after. If I want a really high output and my client's not really warm enough, then I won't get the result that I'm after. So I always go lowest to highest. There's other reasons we do this. As I end my workout, I always want the client to feel like we're building up to something. So as we get to the final end of my hour or whatever workout, I want to end it on something that's relatively hard, or probably the highest heart rate output of the workout. Because when they're done that and they're fatigued and they're all finished and they're all done, they then get to do a cool down and go home. I don't tease them by going really hard rest all the time. I end it always on the hardest thing and then bring them away. That's not to say the most cognitively challenging thing. I mean the highest heart rate thing. So what this might look like, if you've looked at some of our previous videos about heart rate variability, you know there's low intensity interval training and low intensity steady state training, meaning heart rates that spike and heart rates that stay the same. There are mid-intensity interval training and mid-intensity steady state, which is the kind of 75 to 85% of your heart rate, where we do little spikes, where we do continuous runs. And then we have our high intensity, which is HIIT and HISS training, which you've probably heard of before, particularly HIIT. It's become a very marketable analogy and word at the minute, but it just means high intensity interval training, meaning your heart rate goes above 85% and then retracts down to resting, or high intensity steady state, where you go all the way up to the top of your heart rate and you hold it for as long as you can. As I go through my warm-up, I usually start with lit and LISS, low intensity, that's 60 to 75%. I might do a bit of MIT training in the middle, so mid-intensity, and then I end on high intensity. Depending on your client will depend on where their heart rate sits. For the heavier deconditioned client, low intensity and mid-intensity are hard enough, and you'll tell because their heart rate will increase even though they're not necessarily doing anything that you perceive as difficult. But why I try to go low to high is because as I'm warming them up and stuff gets harder and harder and harder. We hit this last movement that feels like a good end to the day. It might be a test, it might be a sprint, it might be a Tabata, it might be just the biggest lift of speed for the day, whatever. But the thing that you perceive as the most physically challenging, while still being in a safe bubble, is probably what I would leave to the end in your main body of a workout, in your session of the day. So that might look like, let's say, leg day, a warm-up. We then do some controlled back squats where we're looking at form and depth. We might then do some intervals where we do some walking lunges with rest. So that's starting to track up more to our middle intensity, because we might do a minute on, minute off. And then we might smash our last thing as a sled push for 5 minutes as fast and as long as they can, which would be very, very hard and would eventually end the session, and you don't really want to keep pushing them past that point. Yeah, very, very notable. So we started with warm-up. We then did our back squat form, which is more like our low intensity because we're focusing more on position than we are ability. We're then doing our mid-intensity, which might be some timing stuff, which we'll get into in a second. And then we end with some high-intensity stuff. But then workout's done, mainly because your client's going to be fried. Like, I don't want to keep frying them. If I do too much, you're going to end in injury or just not get the data that you're trying to get. You'll notice this in Tabatas, then a Tabata being maybe 20 seconds on, 20 seconds off of hard bike work, or 30 seconds, depending whatever it is. If you're tracking their outputs and their spikes of energy, you'll notice that they'll only hit the same markers so often until the Tabatas are no longer doing their job and the client's not getting the same outputs because they're just too fatigued. You haven't given them enough time to rest. At that point, you would consider stopping the test because you're no longer getting the results if that's what you're trying to do. Another concept I want us to think about is the most mentally challenging things first and the least mentally challenging things last. This is, so if I was doing a 1RM squat test, it's very cognitively challenging. So I want to start earlier. It's something they need to think a lot about. They need to be making sure that they're in the right position, tracking their form, making sure they're not getting hurt. If I'm doing some mobility or some isolation drills, let's say we're doing some concentration curls where I'm really trying to squeeze the muscle as I bring it up and then lower it, or if I'm doing some Turkish get-ups where I'm really focusing on my form, I want to start there. Our clients usually sharper at the starter of the workout, and as stuff starts getting harder and harder, like we just talked about, their cognition will drop because they're focusing more on just doing the task than they are on the little things that the task is built around. What I mean by that is, if I asked a client I want you to hold a sled and I want you to really focus on taking your longest step, nice and slow, going from heel to toe and then press in an attempt to warm up their calf and get them to think about where their range of foot and step is today. That's really cognitive, and I can't load them very heavily and I can't make them do it very fast, meaning I can't increase their heart rate quickly because they're more conscious on focusing on how to do that action, less focused on doing it quickly. Versus if I said, I need you to grab that sled and run it as fast as you can, up and back for the next 30 seconds. The client will do that, but there's no cognition. They're just focusing on go. I don't say to the client, hey, I really need you to focus on each of the heel to toe stepping. Think about how long your gait is. Think about how long your steps are. Really think about a slow and controlled breathing, and I need you to run up and down as fast as you can. It's just not possible. It's so much information when you have to decide, do I want them to focus on what they're doing, or do I want them to go really hard for a heart rate or output outcome? What are you trying to do? Because you can't do both. Okay, when they're doing their 1RM squat, they've done all of this focus, and it's getting harder and harder and harder. And the last attempt they have is all instinct. There's no longer time to be focusing. They're just trying to push that bitch up, push the bar up as quickly as they can. That is the point. They're getting less and less cognitive as it gets harder and harder and harder. You might start a warm-up with a back squat that's really cognitive, focusing on slow, pause, breath, up, whatever. But as they get harder and harder, it's just a quick bang of a movement. Think about yourself when you're doing perhaps a long jog and you're focusing on postures, you're focusing on breathing, you're focusing where your arms are. You only are able to do that because you're not in a space that's cognitively overwhelming. Versus if I asked you to do a sprint for 100 meters, the only thing that's going through your mind is move quickly. This is seen a lot in fighting sports, where if I'm teaching a group of jiu-jitsu fighters new skills, we always start the day with new skill development, and it's really playful. It's low intensity because my client can't comprehend the subtle details in each of the movements and go at 100%. So you can tell usually in a room of fighters who's good and who isn't, because the new guys go really, really hard when learning new techniques, which makes it very difficult for them to retain any new information, where the experts and the pros will be playing with the other partners, drilling and drilling and drilling to build that muscle to mind connection, so that when it is time to go hard, they've drilled that movement thousands of times anyway, so it's more instinctive. Think about tying shoelaces, another good example I use with clients, or signatures. When you started learning your signature, you would have been very slow, very methodical, trying to think about how to do your signature. And as you've gotten better, and as you've done more and more and more reps around this particular movement, you can start doing it quickly without thought. And that's how we want to build our program. The things that are cognitively challenging, we start early on, and we move less and less cognitively challenged as they go, which pairs up perfectly with increasing intensity as the session goes as well. I don't put cognitive things with high intensity things, doesn't work. I do put cognitively challenging things with low intensity things so they can think as they perform a movement. That's a really good tip for you guys, and in a general sense, very, very useful for everyday programming. There's another little rule I really love, and it's called the rule of the Goldilocks. So for those who know the story of Goldilocks and Three Bears, I'll quickly recite it for those who don't. Little girl goes to forest, finds cabin, goes into cabin. 3 porridges sit on a table, a really cold one, a really hot one, and one that's just right. This is a bear's house that we later find out, but the idea of everything in this house is either too hard, too soft, or just right in every sense. The bath, the bed, the food, the porridge, definitely less so the bath, but whatever. The idea is that too much of something is usually no good. Too little of something is usually no good, and just right is kind of where we're trying to aim for our programming. So in the case of programming, I set parameters of reps and or time, so that way if my client exceeds those reps or time, I know the thing I've asked them to do is too easy. If they've gotten less than the reps or time that I've set, it means that the thing was too hard. So we're looking for that Goldilocks, the beautiful middle level. So this is in relation to rest. It is in relation to outputs, which could be either reps or it could be reps and or time. We use this in programming to keep our clients humble when we're not there. And we use it in our one-on-one training to see how hard something actually is for the client. We don't want to hurt them. We also want to make sure we're actually getting the thing that we're trying to do. Now, the next obvious question, I can already hear it in your brain because I've had this conversation 1,000 times, is how do you know your rep range? Hey team, if you're liking this content, what I need you to do is follow us, support us, leave comments. We're here to help programmers be better at programming, make coaches and PTs the best of the best that we can, and it starts with programming and it starts with you. Share, like, subscribe. Well, the beautiful thing about it is that each of your specific types of training have set rep ranges that have been supported by texts already. So we know that strength is about 1 to 5 reps. We know hypertrophy is about 6 to 12 reps. Functional training is about 12 to 15. And then weight loss is about 10 to 15 reps. And each of those are very specifically set there for a reason. So if I was doing hypertrophy with a client, and my client, for example, let's say I set 8 to 12 reps for them, even though it's 6 to 12, whatever. 6 to 12, 8 to 12 doesn't necessarily matter. But let's say we set 6 to 12 for our client. Our client performs a movement. Let's say we're getting them to do back squats over a 3-month block. Our goal is to get them to work with a weight all the way up until they can do more than 12 reps with it in each set. When they do that, we then have assessed that we need to now make this heavier or harder. Okay? If they cannot move the weight up to 6 reps, it means it's too hard to begin with. There is a Russian technique which is all about giving someone a set weight for a long period of time. Let's say it's They find that the client can do a 100 kilo back squat for 6 reps. They then leave them with that weight until they can get 12. Then they retest a 1RM, rinse, repeat, and find the new set. That's a method you can do. You can just set it in their daily programming. You can give them specific weights. It doesn't matter how you want to do it, but we know for hypertrophy, 6 to 12 reps seems to be a happy spot for a lot of people. So that's my Goldilocks window. For something that's perhaps functional training related, we can use time and or reps. We know functional training is between 8 and 15 reps or 12 to 15 reps. We know that for functional training, we really like to have slow and controlled mind-muscle connection, which is something we'll deep dive into later. So if each rep roughly takes about 3 to 5 seconds, it means the client should be aiming between 40 and 70 seconds worth of time under tension. So if the client can't move the weight or perform the activity for 40 seconds, it means whatever you're asking them to do is too challenging. Same true as if they go over 70 seconds, it might be far too easy for the client as well. So we're trying to find that happy middle. You can do it with reps, you can do it with time. The time will always be established by when you calculate how long you want a rep to go for, and then how many reps you want to do in a set. So if the powerlifting set is 1 rep or 1 to 5 reps or 1 to 3 reps, and you as a coach know that you want each rep to go for about 2 seconds, 1 second up, 1 second down, or for 5 seconds, 1 second up, 4 seconds down, it doesn't matter. You can then calculate the Goldilocks zone, or you can rely on the data that suggests the preset rep ranges already. This can be done for running form as well. So if you want to play with a client's running form, your goal is to get them to do a 5-kilometer run in 30 minutes, you can then use the time you would expect them to go in the Goldilocks rule. So you might find the first 2 kilometers are on pace. You're getting them to do it in about 5 minutes and 20 seconds or 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Then every kilometer after that, they start dropping off. You can either increase the training regime that they're getting, the time frame you're after, or you can decrease the amount of space they have to go, whatever it is. You just find the parameter that you like as a runner and then start applying the Goldilocks rule to it. The more sports specific you get, like in that running example, the more minutia and the more little tiny details are added, because different sports will require different things. So that's where becoming an expert in something or mastering a niche becomes really relevant, because every sport will have tons of tiny little rules like Goldilocks versus what we're discussing, which are very global things aimed more at helping intermittent people and beginners. So keep that in mind, team. The Goldilocks rule is absolutely stunning, and I use it for all of my rep ranges. So that way I can use a very similar program, adjust the rep ranges or time under tension, and then give it to a bunch of different people, and it shouldn't it'll affect the results they're getting, but I don't necessarily have to rewrite a whole program every time. That's what more large-scale coaches will have master templates that they can adjust for different needs, which is a skill you should learn to develop after you learn how to do programming. What I want to talk to you about is another little rule of thumb when we're doing the main body of a workout is how many exercises should I use in my client's session? So how many can I do? I get asked that all the time. The reality is it's really not relevant. It's all about time, not necessarily about numbers. So what I mean by that is that you could technically have hundreds of exercises in one circuit over the period of an hour, although it wouldn't be very efficient, but you could do that. It has not so much to do with the exercises, it has kind of to do with the amount of time each exercise takes. So if we're doing a retest day, I might calculate that to do a back squat retest might take 40 minutes between 6 or 7 warm-up reps and then 3 or 5 actual hard going, trying to beat my record reps with the rest in between. Okay, we'll dive into how long rest periods are in a moment. But think about if you have an hour of time, again, that's very general, but quite commonly, most coaches have an hour. If your warm-up takes between 5 and 10 minutes, the end scope is kind of the largest, 10 minutes. Let's say each exercise I want to do is going to last 40 to 70 seconds, or if it's hypertrophy or if it's function, or 6 to 12 reps or 8 to 15 reps, whatever it is. Each rep takes about 3 seconds. So let's just call it a minute per set of exercises. So if I'm doing 5 sets, it means just the workout alone is going to take 5 minutes. And depending on how hard I want the client to go will depend on how long their rest is. So if it's a low intensity or middle intensity, I might give them equal amounts rest as I do the amount of go. So let's say each exercise is going to take 10 minutes. So now we have a warm-up that's taking 10 minutes, and each exercise I want to do is taking 10 minutes. Most cool downs will take 5 to 10 minutes. So you've really, in that setting, only got maybe 3 or 4 exercises you can do based off the fact you only have an hour. So when people ask me how many exercises I should do, it's always dependent on how long you have and what you're trying to achieve. For bodybuilders, since they have to spend a lot of time on singular muscles because they're trying to isolate stuff, their workouts can take 2 hours, because if they're doing 10 minutes or even 20 minutes per muscle group or 30 minutes per muscle group, trying to do many exercises on the one thing to stimulate the most amount of growth, they need longer periods of time, which is often why you see bodybuilders coming in twice a day to get 2 or 4 hours a day isolating muscles. So it all comes down to time, not necessarily number of movements or number of exercises. I could, for example, get 10 movements on a circuit that's going to run for 40 minutes like in a CrossFit setting and completely smash the clients and give them a really high intensity workout. And it was just 8 movements over and over and over again. I could even just do it with 2 movements. I could do a 200 meter run and 10 cleans, and then on the minute, every minute for 30 rounds, completely wiping my clients out, which would be fantastic in the CrossFit setting because they're getting the hypertrophy and desired outcome they're getting. But it was only 2 movements for the whole workout, excluding a warm up and a cool down. So I'm trying to give you context that it's always a depends, and it's always trying to find that happy middle. At the start, it's usually 10 minutes per exercise or 10 minutes per circuit, where you could sneak in as many things as you want. But in this very global conversation, I would be considering how long each thing takes, not necessarily how many things you're doing. The better you are at calculating how long things take, which guess what, it's not that difficult because you know how long the rest is and roughly how long the time is because you understand the rep ranges or time ranges anyway. That will make stuff a lot easier to program at the beginning for sure. The next question I get as well is what movements should I do? So I now know that it's time based on how many movements are going to be in my workout, but what movements should I do specifically when I start off? Well, I always like the rule of 9. The 9 main movement patterns that we teach here are push, pull, plank, squat, lunge, hinge, ground to standing, gait, and crawl is the 9 I like to do. And I like to make sure that each of my clients in a week do at least each of those movements once. Why I do that is because I love functional training. I think functional training gives a lot of benefits. If it's sport specific, like bodybuilding, you may do a little less of the gaits, the crawling, and the ground to standing. Those movements are mainly in there for longevity and health. So I like to think farmer strong. I want them to be strong, look good naked, and functionally powerful. Those are my 3 keys for most of my clients. If people are looking to bodybuilding or sports specific, yes, those things are also relevant, but you must also factor in sports relevance. So a bodybuilder is more focused on push, pull, plank, squat, hinge, and lunge because it's going to create the most amount of growth. Things like deadlifts and curling and squatting and leg press and leg extension, bench press, incline bench press, etc., etc., etc. It depends on what the client's trying to do, but as a rule of thumb, if it's just a general client looking to improve health, look better naked, lose some weight, be a little less niggles and more functionally strong, which seems to be the way the world is traveling at the minute, at least here in 2025, I would look to get push, pull, plank, squat, lunge, hinge, ground to standing, crawl, and gait, each one at some time during their week. I like to do them as 3s, like I just kind of described. Push, pull, and plank, when you start writing sessions for them, they seem to blend really well together to make the workout feel smooth. I don't like workouts that feel like all over the shop, particularly whole body workouts where things don't seem to mix together. You'll see that quite commonly at lower level PTs where people kind of throw a bunch of shit together and there's no real flow to it. So as you practice it or you watch the client go through it, it's like they're doing squats and then they're lying on the floor and now they're doing bench press and now they're doing this and they're doing this, and it's kind of all over the shop. To try to avoid that, push, pull, and plank likes to live together. Hinge, squat, and lunge likes to live together. Gait, crawl, and ground to standing likes to live together because they're the three functionals. Now, that's not a dead set rule of thumb. It's kind of just how I like to run it. I sometimes have sessions with all 9 movement patterns in there. And do remember that the more sport specific it is, the more different things you'll have to throw in there. For example, if you're a jiu-jitsu athlete, ground to standing is one of the more relevant movements because your push, your squat, lunge, and hinge is almost non-existent in a sport that's ground-based until you move up to the feet, which is more wrestling-based. But your ground to standing is the number one, so we'd build stuff around that space. We might even do most of our workouts in the ground to standing space. Just food for thought. Same as rugby player, I'm looking, yes, I need them to be powerful in the push, a pull, and a plank. I need them powerful in a lunge, a squat, and a hinge, but I need them to be incredibly powerful in a gait movement, that sprint and run as they run into other of their opponents and team members in training. I do need them to be good at being able to get up and down off the ground without injury because they're going to get thrown onto the ground. And I certainly need them to be able to be good at crawl just for health and safety sakes. Food for thought. So team, rep ranges, again, I'm just going to quickly touch on it again because we kind of yabbered on, as you guys know I love to do. Strength is about 1 to 5 reps. Hypertrophy is 6 to 12 reps. Functional training is 8 to 15, and weight loss is 10 to 15 plus. Now, there's specific reasons for that. I'm not going to deep dive too heavily into it. There is so much academic text around those rep ranges that it's not funny. Please, I encourage you, if you're going to specialize in strength training or hypertrophy or function or weight loss, the best thing to do is deep dive into the why things are so you are a smarter coach. With weight loss, it's more, I'll quickly touch on each of them now. Weight loss being 15 plus is because our goal for weight loss is moving the most amount of calories for the longest amount of time. I can do that by doing really, 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 really high intensity for a very, very short period of time, burning a lot of calories. I can do middle intensity for a medium amount of time, burning a lot of calories, or I can do low intensity for a long period of time to burn calories. Depends on the client's fitness levels. An example is if I want to lose 300 calories, I might go for a 20 to 30 minute slow intensity jog. Great for a heavier client, great for a client who's doing some recovery, great for a client with an injury because I can do a low impact for a long time to lose that 300 calories. For a middle intensity, I might do 15 or 10 minutes of moderate with a bit of sweat. We might be doing a circuit, we might be doing a gym, a CrossFit class, whatever. I burn that 300 calories but it's harder. I took a lot more focus and I couldn't, probably less appropriate for a client who's just learning or who has not as adapted to training, right? Versus I might have a look at some of the Olympic athletes who are doing a 100-meter sprint and going at absolute 1,000 miles an hour and they're sweating bullets and they do maybe 5-10 minutes of training, maybe even 5 minutes of training, and they lose that 300 grams of 300 calories of movement because it's so high intensity. And it's massively not appropriate for beginner trainers or beginner clients just because it's too high intense. But my point being is that you can do it in 3 different ways. There's 100 ways to skin a cat. All of them are fun is the saying that goes, right? But you can do it in all the different ways. Particularly for weight loss, it just depends on the intensity. What we find is most clients prefer the low to middle intensity over longer periods of time. That's usually a good rule of thumb because it's just can be done for a lot longer period of time and the risk of injury reduces massively. For functional strength training, which is the stuff I specialize in, 12 to 15 gives me both that sexy look where I like people to feel good naked, which is one of the main things my clients ask to get. I like to get the muscles to move through fatigue. I like to be able to repeat things over and over and over again, particularly as a jiu-jitsu coach as well. It might take 5, 10, 15 reps of a push to get someone away from you instead of one really big one, which is then reflected in my functional training capacities. But These are things I would suggest you deep dive in. Remember, strength is about 1 to 5, hypertrophy is about 6 to 12, functions 8 to 15, weight loss is 10 to 15. These will change depending on where you read. These are just some of the markers I like to use. You'll find different academic studies support different metrics. The world's your oyster. Make up your own opinion. Don't just base it off some dude on the internet talking to you. But those are the metrics I like to use. A really common question that I get asked by my other PTs or I mentor is, how much rest should I be giving my clients? So we know rest is massively important, because if you have the right work to rest ratio, your client can continuously repeat the outcomes that you're asking them to do. Okay. So in a very general sense, what I like to do is, if it's a low intensity activity, meaning it's below 75% heart rate, I like to go a ratio of 1 to 1. So if my client does a minute's worth of work at a lower intensity heart rate, I will give them a minute amount of rest. Okay, just as a general rule of thumb. They shouldn't be physically fatigued massively from that. So if it's low intensity heart rate, they shouldn't be completely smashed from that movement. I'm probably focusing more on cognition than I am physicality anyway. So a ratio of 1 to 1 is usually appropriate. So if I'm getting them to do Turkish get-ups, if I'm getting them to do some controlled bicep curls with a squeeze with a mind to muscle, if I'm getting them to do some knee rehabilitation lunging drills or some leg extension drills, or I might be getting them to do some light jogging, I could be doing a very light playful circuit, I'm going to rest them 1 to 1. You'll find that a lot of circuits don't have any rest, but interval training certainly does. So like supersets and pyramid sets and et cetera, et cetera. But low intensity is a 1 to 1 ratio. Middle intensity, so that's 75% of heart rate to 85% of the heart rate. You can test this with Apple Watch's team heart rate variability wraps. You can just ask the client their perceived rate of exertion, meaning how do you feel out of 10? You can ask them these things. I like to give them a 1.5 to 1. So if it takes them a minute to do something, I'll give them a 1.5 minutes rest, because usually we're getting more into the muscle fatigue space. A lot of bodybuilding training that I give to clients is in the middle intensity, because when you're isolating smaller muscles, they can't generate enough power and heart rate to push you to the higher heart rate intensity often, with the exception of the big movements like big squats, deadlifts, and bench. But little stuff like tricep extension, bicep curling, leg extension, rear deltoids, front deltoids, it's harder to get your heart rate up enough before the muscles fatigue. So middle intensity is often where they're going to sit. So I give them a ratio of 1 to 1.5. If it takes them about a minute, then I'm going to give them a 1.5 minutes. I can already hear the question in your brain, Coach Chicken Legs, what if they're in a rep range? What if I'm getting them to do 10 reps? I would time how long it takes them to do 10 reps. If you have a cadence, if you're asking to do a certain amount of reps in a certain amount of time, you already have the time metric. But if you're asking them to do 12 reps as quick as they can or 8 reps as quick as they can, time how long it takes them to do that, and then give them that plus a half of rest before asking them to do the next thing. If you're getting them to do a superset where you do perhaps push-ups into pull-ups, so you're trying to do the push-pull day, I would then, if that takes them 2 minutes, they do a minute and a minute, I would then give them 2.5 or 3 minutes rest before you repeat. So again, a ratio of 1 to 1.5. The more intensity we go up, the longer rest they're going to have from a safety point of view and from a cognition point of view. This, again, very general. If you're looking really deep diving into cognition and muscle recovery and all of the ATP recovery stuff and the power stroke cycle recovery stuff, which is more exercise phys related, they go really in depth of how long time ratios are for rest to work. That's not what we're here to talk about today. But for your high intensity, I like to go 1 to 2. So if it takes them a minute, I give them 2 minutes rest. If it takes them 30 seconds, I give them a whole minute rest, whatever it be, right? For higher intensity, you're going to find that longer rest periods are almost always better than shorter, particularly if I want them to do the same thing again. If I want them to give me their best 10 box jumps, as high as they possibly can and as hard as they possibly can, I can't ask them to do that with very short periods of rest because they can't generate that output every single time. Seen really well on like Tabatas or sprints, where if I get someone to do a 20-meter sprint as hard as they can, if I just kept asking them to do it every 10 seconds, their sprint time would just decrease and decrease and decrease and decrease. But there'll be a point where as the rest increases, if I start giving them 20 seconds or 30 or 40 or a minute or 2 minutes, they keep getting the same output where they keep hitting the 4 seconds it takes to do a 20-meter sprint over and over and over again until they physically can't do it anymore for other reasons that are not rest related. Okay, so a good rule of thumb for high intensity, it's 1 to 2. For low intensity, it's 1 to 1. For middle intensity, it's 1 to 1.5. But this is all very sport specific. It's very training specific. These are general rules. You can adapt them as you need. Okay, remember that circuits, so steady state training, particularly in the language of this channel, they have no rest. So by definition, there is no rest period for them. They have continuous movement throughout. Versus interval training, which again is a language we use a lot on this channel, they will have rests that are appropriate to the amount of work that they're doing. But again, general rule of thumb, that's really what I want to harp on about. So team, what I will do is I'll put up some examples of these things we're talking about now, in case you're a visual learner, so you can see stuff. Seeing stuff is really important. I'll put a link to some things in and under these videos. We didn't necessarily deep dive into how to write stuff. This was more a general, some of the rules I like to consider whilst writing stuff. In future videos, I'm going to give you hours of templates and years of programming so you can just take it straight away and just use it straight away. This kind of stuff just helps expand your mind as a coach, expand your mind as a program writer, so you can be better at personal training. We will deep dive into all of this stuff as time progresses, and fear not, we will be readdressing this stuff in more and more depth so often that you're going to get sick of hearing it, which is what we want. I want you to be so good at this content that you're genuinely bored of it. The more, if you can recite what I'm telling you over and over and over again to anyone who listens, and it's just second nature to you, kind of like signing your name on a bit of paper, like the first rep's hard, and after a million reps, you can just do it without thinking. If you get to that level with this kind of conversation and with your programming, you're just going to be an unbelievable coach. Remember that if your goal is to make the service as good as you possibly can for a client, the money will follow the attitude. If you're just one of the best around and you're kind and you're considerate and you put in all the energy to make their programs as good as you can make them, it makes it significantly easier to sell, significantly easier to market because you already have results from clients. And it means that you enter a newer prestige as a coach and you can take on higher clients and therefore charge higher amounts. So all of this links together, but it all comes from the initial, I actually give a shit. There's a lot of people who finish their certificates and then just want to enter the workforce and use ChatGPT or just take stuff off the internet and go. And although that might help you at the start, it eventually, if you're not continuously trying to educate yourself in programming and to be a better coach, you'll hit a plateau and you'll drop off because you're not making the income that you think and feel you deserve. If you're actually putting in the work and trying to educate yourself, like health professionals do, health professionals have to have continued proof of education as they're going through their life and courses. If you're doing that, you will increase your prices and you will increase in your wage and your money, which is what I want you to do. I want you to make a lifestyle out of being a coach. And some of these concepts that we just discussed today will aid you in doing that. Okay, I'll see you next time, team. And when we deep dive even further into some of these beautiful concepts around programming for personal training.